Know that fighting and arguing on crab boats will not be tolerated. Once found, they're thrown into the sea to feed the fish. But this show has 2 vicious fights in a row. I think they finally realized they were green. So you'd rather feed your fish than exhale. One of them is about to become a co-captain. I don't know what made him throw his whole life away. We're gonna have to fight this kid. Let's take a look. The Summer Bay rode the waves. Bill on the boat peed with prostate cancer. Bill has felt since he went crabbing. My mental state is getting better and better. There's less cancer and a pension. Compared to the torture in the hospital, life is not too wonderful now. Today is 20 days since the start of the crab season. About a third of the fleet met its quota. The port of Holland Harbor. Sophia, they just finished unloading and are ready to go. There's $18 million left on the current king crab quota. It can be bought out outright for just 1.2 million pounds. The Witch has had 2 days of bumper harvests. Only 4 hours of rest in 2 days. This harvest will earn each crew $20,000. But in Jolly, the Witch's power system failed. At the same time, a quarrel broke out on the lady. That's the end of the story and the start of the film. On board the Wizard, 185 miles from Dutch Harbor. They're living through a storm the likes of which they've never seen. A dozen meters of waves crawled onto the boat and bit people. Even Keith, the decades-long captain, said so. Storms of this magnitude are rare. It has even reached the level of a Category 7 storm warning. Working in this environment can kill you if you're not careful. Here's what Keith plans to do next. Cross the yellow no-take zone. Place crab pots in a deep ditch near a no-catch area. Keith was sure that the crabs must be hiding in this deep ditch. He's next up for the remaining 36,000 pounds. When you reach the designated area, start releasing the pot. The crew on the brink of death releases the crab pot. Keith just saw a big wave 18 meters high. Fortunately, the waves dissipated ahead of schedule. Hundreds of kilos of crab pots can't lift a single wave in these waters. The power system suddenly collapsed during this extreme crisis. Maintenance workers rushed to the power center. Keith immediately ordered everyone to stay away from the crab pot. Repairmen also found faults in the electrical system. This cremation belt lightning probably straightens when you touch it. It took Keith a long time to find the emergency light switch. After one of the repairmen hand lights back on, the crew can be stable again. I guess if the photographer wasn't watching, a repairman wouldn't fix it that fast. The reason for this accident is one of the wires on the live end and the supply end is burned. That's what caused the main breaker to cut power to the entire ship. Keith is a real cheapskate. The Witcher has had 2 accidents and hasn't been refurbished. When it was over, the crew continued to release crab pots. The Seabrook, Southport, Netherlands. A worker is weighing a caught snow crab. Sophia and Greg are watching. In case of what happened on the Witcher, the gross revenue from the voyage was $150,000. Captain Greg broke the law and offered $10,000. Let's get the whole crew out and have fun, but must be back on deck by midnight. Because it happened before with the Western Luke. The drunken, delayed crew bullshit. All the crew were very happy about the exercise. He said on camera to get bail money ready. By 1:30 a.m., Greg was back. But none of the crew came back. Greg's mouth smells sweet seeing the crew like that.
Because they're obviously a bunch of idiots.
2 crew members, Sean, arrived late at 2:42. He telephoned the 2 returning sailors. How the 2 of them rushed the rest of the crew. 2 more crew members returned at 3:40. 2 of them are like thieves, pinching their feet. Just then, there was a noise of quarreling. The scene happened to be captured by a dazed photographer. 2 crazy mouths and 1 punch-up. You know there's no such thing as crew fighting on crab boats. So what was it that made this crew member so angry? It's a good thing Megan got here just then. Stop this growing conflict. Greg heard the crash. Gathered the crew in the hallway for a meeting. Sleepy Sophia looked confused, trying to figure out how to get some sleep and fight. 10:32 in the morning. Greg has an early meeting with the crew. He already said no driving after drinking. But someone started the car last night. After the morning meeting, the true image of last night came out. It was drunk Nick who peed in Mark's face. And then Mark couldn't resist taking out one of Nick's teeth. If it wasn't a documentary, I wonder if the writers had too much to drink at night to come up with such an abstract plot. Greg said it too. This crew has so little self-control. That's not the kind of crew this team needs. On board the Lady 230 miles, Dutch Harbor. The crew is hard at work. Rick's plan is on the edge of the trench. Set up a crab trap to enclose the deep trench. Let all the crabs that want to go out pass through the crab pot. Finally, put 40 crab pots on the outside. This allows for maximum efficiency. Jacob is directing crew arrangements. The crab pot slowly descends the lady and the ocean wager officially begins. Jacob's up there running the show. That's hard on Matt down there, who's helping him with his work. Matt wants to kick Jacob's ass right now. The stakes are up again as more crab pots enter the sea.
2 lasers can't do. All they want to do is talk.
Rick woke up and came to the captain's room to see Jacob do the job perfectly. I don't hesitate to praise Jacob, but when he just put on his overalls, Matt started spraying when we got to the deck. It's not like Jacob just sprayed it back. The two quarreled more and more violently. The back of it is sprayed on the 18th generation of their ancestors. Rick finally persuaded Jacob to let it go, but Matt took it a step further and started being racist. I can't even listen to Captain Rick anymore. Rick told the crew to assemble when things calm down. Fire Matt in front of everyone here. Tell him to fuck off when the boat returns to port. And he said to my face that whenever someone is racist, he won't take any of the boats. Jacob also asked Matt why he was angry. He felt it was pure nonsense. Are we all gonna die if there's no one to steer? What Captain Rick is worried about right now. If we can find the crew when we unload the cargo at Dutch Harbor. This job pays well, but sometimes it doesn't work out. 55 miles northeast of the Summer Bay. The weather here is so bad the waves are biting. The crew cast an anchor hook from the deck. The Summer Bay hasn't seen a single crab in the last 2 days. Bill now had to pray that his judgment was correct. There are 4 days left before his delivery date, but he still has a quota of 23,000 pounds to meet. The crane slowly exerted force. Bill is becoming more and more worried about his illness. Now he often gets dizzy and nauseous from a little shaking. Think back to a young Bill who could fight 10 times a night. The crab pot is pulled up, and there are a lot of king crabs. Bill's bet was right this time. A basket full of crabs was dumped on the sorting machine. It's like a wife out of the shower. The first cage alone contains 45 adult male crabs. The second cage came in the same way. The crew cheered, and the crabs bumped into each other. It's a beautiful symphony. This one alone costs $5,000. Enough to cover a family of 4 for 2 months. Good luck may come, but it doesn't come for nothing. Bill's got a leak in the hydraulic system on this old boat. The crew rushed to repair. Not many crabs have been caught. Bill could drink a jug for the money he spent fixing the boat. The crew canvassed every possible oil spill. It was the crew member who finally discovered the leak. The sailor briefed Bill on the situation. A leak in the main hydraulic line is dangerous. If left unattended for a long time, the compressor will be damaged. But because the Summer Bay is so old, the walls are so thin. Do not weld with a torch. You could lose the game if you try to fix it yourself. Bill thought it over and decided to trust the repairman. Because there's no underpants left to lose if we call for help. The picture is coming to the Western Rick. Captain Greg is teaching Sophia how to manage a crew. Because this time the crew is out playing. It's the test Greg gave Sophia. I can't believe Sophia brought Greg a big one. The crew outside are preparing for the sea. When Greg wishes he had something else to do, Sophia can manage everything on the ship. Greg was a little disappointed by the ordeal. Sophia replied that the reason for the poor management of the crew is she felt like the crew were bigger than she was. So Sophia was too embarrassed to bother them. Greg told Sophia, "You're the captain of this ship. In a highly dangerous business like crabbing, crew members do what they're told, or the whole ship could be in jeopardy." What does Sophia understand about the captain after this puzzlement? The crew who got their teeth knocked out last night came by to thank Greg. The Seabrook is almost ready, 185 miles north of the Witch. Dozens of meters of spray rushed onto the deck. Now Keith is racing to the edge of the no-take zone. The waves were pretty brutal because they were upwind. Keith will load 3,400 pounds of crabs on his return voyage. Just landed at the destination and cast the first hook. The crane began to exert force, and Keith had to do some crab hands as the crab pot slowly rises to the surface. The crabs in this cage are all adult males. It can be accepted with almost no screening, and the second cage didn't let them down a whole cage. Keith was way ahead of his time. So Keith's crab catch was ahead of its time. Keith rushed to warn the crew when a big wave hit. Luckily, everyone got out of the way quickly and no one got hurt. Keith was relieved to see everyone alive and kicking, and the smart-looking crew member was happy. The crane forces the crab pot on the bottom of the sea and slowly pulls it to the surface. As expected, the cage was full again. The crew was in a good mood. After all, a pot of crabs can make $200. Average 50 cages a day for $10,000 a day. I can't make $10,000 in 2 years. Crying my ass off. There's nothing we can do to stop the Witcher with this momentum. The crew and the captain work together to earn the money. 180 miles east of the Summer Bay. Engineers are still working on the hydraulic line. All Bill could do now was watch the crabs run wild. I can't move my own boat when it's broken. It's a tough engineer to fix a hole as small as a pin. If this hole is opening up a little, Bill and the crew are going to lose everything. The only thing they can do now is plug the gap with 2 layers of hose and put a steel pipe 1 size bigger on it. I had to cram because I didn't have the right accessories. The engineer clicked in this way. Finally got the old Summer Bay running again. The engineer had a hard time with all this work. Anyway, I get scared every time I see the summer bay go. Bill's biggest wish right now is no trouble. Let's get this old guy through the season. 60 miles southwest on the Lady. Rick and Jacob are talking about Matt. Jacob wants Matt to keep his job. After all, it's a lot of trouble to lose one man and one hole. If Matt stays in his room, eating and dying, Rick won't even be able to pay his mortgage in the end. But Rick hates racism. I don't want people like that contaminating his ship. Jacob doesn't really care about these opinions. Besides, Matt already apologized to Jacob, whether he meant it or not. Anyway, there will be no conflict between the two for now. Rick had to rethink the solution. After all, the penalty for not meeting the quota is not small. On deck, Jacob hurls the anchor hook, with the crane gears moving. The crab pot is slowly pulled out of the water. This cage just blew up the morale of the whole ship. After all, they haven't had any water in 2 days. This wave of king crabs is the best way to reassure the crew. Then the second harvest was not as good as the first. But this is a big pot of crabs with no baby crabs. Then the third cage of crabs was even bigger and bigger. This is going to be a red romance for the year. Since the manager's fire and power outage on the Wizard, the crew thought it was the crab god's punishment. Although I am a materialist, but if I have a fire or a power outage every 3 days, I feel like someone's putting a curse on me. Not surprising considering what happened on The Witcher. Keith's mouth is really crooked. Story back on track. The lady had just started harvesting when the crane gear broke. All this bad luck is driving Rick crazy. This thing doesn't look too technically difficult, does it? But trying to fix it artificially is no less than you confessing to your goddess. And finally, your goddess says, I like you too. To fix this thing, we have to get back to Dutch Harbor. It costs no less than $10,000. But this thing is essential for crabbing. There's nothing anyone on board can do about it. So the crew had to reel in the float manually. This crew is really miserable. But the good news is that the harvest did not disappoint their efforts. The crabs are alive, and the gay love is alive and well. There are not many small crabs in this cage. Jacob is also leading the crew by example. Pull the crab pot up manually. Rick's getting more and more bullish on this guy, Jacob. The second cage of crabs is neither small nor large. What kind of crab is this? All right, let's figure out the revenue of each ship. First place, the Wizard, $410,000. Second place, Northwest 38, $40,000. The third woman is $380,000. Fourth thief, $37,300. The fifth mariner, $320,000. Sixth place Titan, 27 points, $50,000. Seventh place, Summer Bay, $60,000 for 15. For the rest of the story, the captain and his crew. What other Waterloo is in store? Do you want to know what happened next? This is definitely the unluckiest crew in the Bering Sea. I just got up in the morning and I was hit head on by the waves. I was out all day, but I finally recovered, and I lost my mandible to the waves. There was nothing to do but send him to the hospital for treatment. 6 months, pay for 12 titanium nails to make Iron Man. Just got back for a break. Got another leg knocked over by a steel frame. It is said that the blessing is double and the disaster is double. And now being forced to work by Captain Capitalist. This is way worse than me working overtime. The Northwest travels through the open ocean. The sad old white in the captain's room. On deck, the crew was shattered by the waves. Trouble broke out between Sophia and the crew of the Seabrook. That's the end of the story and the start of the film. 240 miles from Dutch Harbor aboard the Titan. Anderson took a bottle of perfume and sprayed it in the captain's room. If you take another cigarette, it's a plus and a minus. The crew on deck hurled the anchor hook. The crane began to exert force. This is Titan's first crab pot of the day. They haven't gotten much better since their last harvest. Anderson is tracking a king crab colony right now. He now has a quota of $750,000 to meet. We can't get it out on the delivery date. The shareholders will kick him out of the meeting. The first pot of crabs was soon pulled out. The result is a miner to fill the fill. Looks like Anderson missed the king crab swarm. The second spear is thrown. Well, it's not a good cage, is it? This left Anderson scratching his head. The third cage is a little better. There are 2 of them in the yard. The crew was not in a good mood when they didn't catch any crabs. If we can't find Anderson here, we're going southwest. The waters are cooler over there, and the crabs might go there. At the same time as the old white apprentice, I found out through White's schedule. The crew on deck set up crab pots for departure. If there's a chance to run into White, it'll only be easier for the 2 of them to crabber together. 25 miles north-northwest. The old White's harvest is not so good, okay? It's not ideal, but it's enough for gas. Faced with this situation, Old By was very worried. Because quotas are up for grabs, we are currently 15,000 pounds short of our first quota. If the king crab is not submitted on time, their quota will be allocated to other ships. Then Anderson, 25 miles away, called. He wants to invite Old White to go fishing in the south. Old White answered his side of the situation is okay. Anderson then brought up the 2007 crab fishing chart. Old White began to pretend that he did not know. Anderson saw the Old White determined not to go and did not continue to say. After the end of the call, Old White called up a confidant of the crew, Clark. He told Clark about the Anderson call. Old White wondered how Anderson knew his crabbing chart. Crabbing charts are a simple thing. It's the captain's map of the crab population based on water temperature and weather, usually only for their own and confidant's reference. Technically, Anderson would never know. Well, then there's only one reason. Anderson peaked while he was sailing the Northwest. Old White decided to give his apprentice a little lesson. 140 miles southwest of the Seabrook. Greg's harvest wasn't that good either. Although the harvest is not good, the crabs that come up are ugly. Then the second cage yielded even less. It made Sophia sit up. Greg's hair is thinning. Now if we don't catch a lot of snow crabs, well, it's going to be tough for them for a while. Next, wait until the golden crab season arrives. 10 crab boats are arriving in the Bering Sea. If we don't get the second quota by then all of Greg's efforts will be for naught, and the loss of the entire crew. On deck, Nick's missing tooth is getting more and more painful. After crabbing for a while, I have to go to the sink to gargle. If you don't rinse your mouth, your gums will burn. Greg looks at Nick gargling on the camera. I can only sigh that it was his own death. It was 5 days ago. Drunk Nick urinates on another crew member, Mark. Mark was happy about it too. I gave Nick an elbow that knocked his teeth out. Who else can Nick blame for this situation but himself? But now Nick's rotten teeth has taken a toll on Nick's productivity. You know, time is money on a crab boat. Every second a quota is submitted late, there's a crab boat grab. Nick Koo dictated that he wanted to go home now, but his home is 1,000 kilometers from the Bering Sea. The deck work is almost finished. The weather in the Bering Sea has also become more severe. Nick is called to the captain's room by Greg. Greg asked Nick why he didn't take some medicine for relief. Nick said it was because he was allergic to the amoxicillin on the ship. His idea was to have Sophia pull it out for him. So Sophia looked into Nick's mouth with a flashlight. Almost half of the tooth was still attached to the gum. In this case, a hard pull could cause massive bleeding. I mean, it could be the tooth that doesn't come out. Sophia is not a doctor. After all, you can cure Megan or rely on Baidu. There's not much Greg can do about it. Had to put Nick on antibiotics to keep his gums from getting infected. 130 miles northeast of the lady. Jacob just showed it to the audience.
The Aleutian Lady. Yeah, baby. You don't think we flop no matter the weather, no matter the boat. Yeah.
The conditions here on the lady are pretty bad. The waves were so big, they almost capsized the lady. Captain Rick's delivery date is in 4 days. He has 4 days to meet his $450,000 quota. The task can be daunting. So Rick followed the crabs all the way to a deep ditch. 130 crab pots were placed in the choppy waters. But the weather in this part of the ocean is just too bad. The waves around here are just random. I mean, I'm going to eat on the spot if I get hit. Crewman Nit was hit by waves like this a few years ago. The mandible was broken straight through. After this, he was the hardest worker on the ship. But this is not a good time to talk about Nit. With the crane force, the crab pot is slowly pulled up. There were only a few small crabs inside. So small, it looks like malnutrition. The sea is getting rougher. The danger is also approaching the lady. Rick suddenly saw a huge wave coming and quickly alerted the crew. It's a good thing Nit took a big hit and the focus was on the chest. If the waves had been higher, they would have taken Nit. Rick told Nate to go home and get some rest. As much as Rick wants him to rest. But a crab boat is a turnip in a pit. You lose one person, you lose a lot of efficiency. That's why we work here, when we can move. 62 miles northeast of the Titan. They've arrived at the designated spot to start releasing crab pots. Anderson based his crab map on Old White. The crab pot is supposed to run along the south. Anderson Koo recalls the crab season. It was very similar to his first season. Most people don't have a good harvest, you know? The crab pot sinks into the sea and hits a tiny jellyfish. White spotted Anderson's float on the northwest. Old White is ready to teach his apprentice a little lesson. His plan was to take Anderson's 20 crab pots with him, run for 50 miles, and then drop it. White asked his confidant Clark to do it. I'm in a good mood at the thought of taking on Anderson White. Clark hurls the spear rope. Pull it up, and it doesn't even have a crab leg. 140 miles west. Sophia extrapolates from the data on the computer. A wave of snow crabs migrates to nearby diving areas. On deck, the crew laid out crab pots in advance. Greg sent everyone back to bed. With the crab fleet approaching the date of entry, the burden on Greg's shoulders grew. Sophia came to the break room to talk Nick into his meds. But Nick won't listen or eat. Nick finally came up with the reason. You know, he figured a lot of things out after the beating. Money doesn't matter. Go home and find a wife. Greg was so mad at me for saying that. If Nick leaves, his crabbing efficiency will go down. Efficiency loss quota cannot be filled. It's going to hurt everyone on board. Greg tried to talk him out of it before he called him up. Nick came up here and said he figured it out. I don't want to die young and go home. It's just a lot of bala. Greg had to make sense of it. You have to at least finish it or you don't have any money. How do you get a wife and support your parents? How do you buy milk powder for your newborn son? Which is why we can't stop halfway. Besides, if you leave, everyone on this ship will be drinking from the Northwest. He ended up getting a 10% raise. Nick only stayed when he heard about the pay raise. Actually, the crew who don't want to leave, who wouldn't want to go home and settle down with a wife and kids. It's just a burden on my shoulders. I have to work in this dangerous environment. Upon arrival at the destination, the crew began to release crab pots, 120 miles northeast of the lady. And Neat's injury is almost healed. Back on deck with Jacob, 2 days until Rick's delivery date. He still has 25,000 pounds of king crab left to catch. The deck crew cast the anchor hook. The crab pot is slowly pulled out to the full. Pour the vibrant crabs onto the sorting machine. The crew threw out the spear line without stopping. The second cage of crabs is also quite large. To Rick's excited giggle, this wave of crabs is pretty big. The crabs are full of energy and big heads and gay love. But in this happy atmosphere, the sorter is stuck in place. The big men tried their best to pull them.
I'm about to get out!
This time, Nick couldn't stand it. It was a bad episode for the little scene Neat. Bad things happened to me again and again. I couldn't stand it either. But as soon as Nick left, the sorter started moving again. Rick was also worried when he saw this scene, so he went to the dorm and comforted Nit. Rick's really worried about Nit right now. These dangers are less about physical harm. It's the magic that hurts these few times. It reminded him of the shadow of the waves, the one before the attack. He's got 12 titanium spikes on his jawbone. These dozens of iron nails will become the shadow of his life. Jag hoppas that gets better soon. The people on deck are still harvesting. The picture is coming to the northwest. The northwest quota will be met soon. White has already thrown out Anderson's crab pots. With the crew throwing the spear rope, the crane began to exert force. Crab pots slowly out of the water to receive the goods did not let everyone down. These crabs can sell for $200 each. The second cage was equally fruitful. A crab landing on a sorter is like gold landing. Old Boy was very happy to see such a good harvest. The third cage is still very fruitful. And then the fourth cage is still full. Anderson's going to be so jealous when he sees this. The picture came to the Titan. Anderson looked at the position of the crab pot on the instrument. But I looked left and right, and I couldn't find it. Then another man was called to look in the bow. The result is still nothing. Anderson looked blankly at the instrument. I don't think the crab pot can still run on legs. But then I turned around and called Old Boy. Old White Face proudly picked up the phone. Anderson gets right to the point. White said he gave Anderson a surprise. Gave Anderson latitude and longitude to find his own. And emphasized that this is a treasure game. This is going to piss Anderson off. 140 miles west of the Seabrook. Nick's gums won't respond to the small amount of antibiotics. By the time he woke up in the morning, his teeth were even infected. The crew's mission today is to retrieve 40 crab pots, with the crane slowly force. The first crab pot is emerging today. As the saying goes, a good manager always sees a rainbow. That's exactly what happened on the Seabrook. This snow crab is bigger than Megan's head. The second cage crabs board the deck. The harvest is still very good. It's also a great morale booster for the crew. Third boat on board. There are more crabs than I can count. This cage of crabs do not know how many years can be in the red romance. This snow crab is also surprisingly large. To Sophia's happy ear to ear. 160 miles northeast of the Titan. The crew is picking up crab pot bait. Anderson's still yelling at the captain's room. On arrival, Anderson orders salvage. The crew hurled the spear rope. Anderson from the captain's cabin called Old White. The Old White on the other side saw the call from ear to ear. Turn with the jack gear. Anderson also jumped on the heartstrings. Come to the side of the lady. Jacob starts brushing his teeth with water. Should I tell you this kid's not afraid of getting sick? Picture back on track. The crab pot pulled up by the crane had no hair at all. People who are mad at Anderson are starting to talk nonsense. Old White here happily tell Anderson the next address. With the crew cast the anchor hook. The crab pot is slowly lifted and there are quite a few crabs. They're fat and they have 10 times more protein than beef. Anderson, who had just been wildly abusive, suddenly changed his face. There are 31 of them in this cage alone, not to mention the other 18 cages. Then White gave Anderson the next address. When I got to the place, I found a big cage full. The little crabs made the crew happy. I'm ready to start the crab dance. How could Old Boy, as a master, really pit his apprentices? It's just a small lesson. The lady, 40 miles south. The harvest here lasted all day and all night. These little crabs are angels. They'll still be eaten, but they're angels. The crabs we catch are piling up like gold. This kid is pushing his luck when he asks you for your heart. And Nate in the lounge doesn't want to slow us down. The crew cheered him when he came on deck. With the addition of Nit, there are more crabs. The crew is too busy to be happy. After all, a cage costs $200. You can make 20 grand in one day's harvest. You don't want to miss this lucrative opportunity. On the other side, the Seabrook has reached port, having fulfilled its quota. Nick also went to the hospital. I just don't know if I can get it back. In this video, fishing boat revenue inventory. First lady number, 88, $10,000. Second place, Northwest, 54:40, $000. The third warlock, $20,000 at 48. The fourth thief, $80,000 at 46. The fifth mariner, $50,000 at 45. The sixth titan, $440,000. Number 7, Seabrook, $27,000. Number 8, the Summer Bay, $189,000. For the rest of the story, the captain and his crew. What other Waterloo is in store? Do you want to know what happened next?